Ontario families. And so we have here with us today, prepared to make statements about an important announcement that we're making. We have Abdul Raouf Janga from the Thorncliffe Parents Association. We have myself, Jack Fonseca from Campaign Life Coalition. We have Tanya Granick-Allen, who most of you probably know from Parents as First Educators and a former leadership candidate for the PC Party. And we have Queenie Yu from president of the Stop the Sex Ed Agenda Party. And we also have Lou Iacobelli, who is not speaking here, but he is the president of the Parental Rights and Education Defense Fund with us here. Lou, do you mind standing up just so everyone knows who you are?
Thanks. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, thank you. And there were other group and ethnic and community leader partners that were going to come and stand with us in solidarity, but unfortunately because of the bad weather they weren't able to. So we'll get started, and Tanya, did you want to go first?
Sure. Okay. So thank you very much, Jack, for that introduction. And yes, there were several other member groups from the Canadian Families Alliance, which is an umbrella group, and of which Kate is a member, from all over the province, including actually the country. So as the head of the biggest parental rights group here in Ontario, the one voice which matters most in this province on how and what children are taught is the voice of parents. We've said this time and time again, and I say it again. Always respect the parent's voice. This is paramount. Yet, since being named as Minister of Education, Lisa Thompson has failed to respect the parent's voice by not repealing the WIN Sex Ed. She has betrayed Doug Ford's commitment to Ontario families that the WIN Sex Ed should be repealed, and that it would be repealed. Her lawyers and her own assistant Deputy Minister of Education have declared in recent court proceedings, both at the Ontario Human Rights Court and with the Ontario Superior Court with the ETFO CCLA versus the government, Ministry of Education. She said, her lawyers and the assistant ADM said that the WIN Sex Ed can still be used. That children can be taught any subject matter from any grade level, be it high school, elementary, at any level. And perhaps the most contentious to parents is that yes, children can still learn gender identity in class. This is a betrayal to parents, it's a betrayal to children, and it's a betrayal to Premier Doug Ford. 1 year ago tomorrow, February 13th, it was Doug Ford who in a media interview, when pressed about what he found problematic with the WIN Sex Ed, referred to the teaching of gender identity theory in classrooms as, quote unquote, liberal ideology. Those were never my words, those were his words. Lisa Thompson, however, in her maiden speech in the legislature last July, said that she knows children need to learn about gender identity and has since reinforced this position again and again, as explicated through recent affidavits and cross-examinations of her lawyers at the recent court proceedings. You know, yesterday Premier Doug Ford made me chuckle actually when he referenced this crazy Marxist nonsense that student unions get up to in university. And I thought, well, why has Lisa Thompson not repealed the crazy Marxist nonsense that vulnerable children are being exposed to and subjected to in the classroom? So Lisa Thompson has failed to repeal the WIN Sex Ed. It's a betrayal to parents, it's a betrayal to our young and precious children, and this is a betrayal to Premier Doug Ford's promise to repeal. So since Lisa Thompson is incapable, or appears to be incapable of carrying out Doug Ford's wishes and the mandate he received and repealing the WIN Sex Ed, we Ontario parents are calling on Lisa Thompson to resign as Minister of Education. Thank you.
Okay, and Queenie, would you like to go next?
Sure. As Jack mentioned, I'm Queenie Yu, leader of Stop the New Sex Ed Agenda. We are a registered political party in Ontario. In a way, we are like the Liberals that do not have official party status in the legislature. The Liberals just have 7 more seats than us. Unlike the Liberals, though, we don't aspire to form government in Ontario. We do try, however, to have an impact on the policy debate in this province. I started this party in the fall of 2016 when Patrick Brown said that if you're against the WIN Sex Ed, you can't be a good progressive conservative. In other words, Brown tossed many of us out of the party. Not literally then, at least effectively. I originally wanted to call my party the Stop Kathleen WIN Sex Ed Agenda, But Elections Ontario said I wasn't allowed to use the Premier's name in my party name, so I settled for Stop the New Sex Ed Agenda. I wanted to make sure that everyone knew what exactly we were working towards. Last year, during the PC Party leadership race, Doug Ford promised to repeal and replace the Win Sex Ed. He repeated his promise during the general election, and the promise was reiterated during the July 12th speech from the throne. Many people then asked me if there was still a need for my political party because it seemed like Doug Ford was on our side and that the job of repeal and win sex ed was done, mission accomplished. But I said, I'm not sure, it's not quite gone yet, so let's just see what happens. The unfortunate truth is that Kathleen Wynne's sex ed is still alive and well. In the 7 months that Lisa Thompson has been Minister of Education, she has not done her job in keeping the government's promise to repeal Wynne's sex ed. On February 13th, 2018, as Tanya mentioned, 1 year ago tomorrow, Doug Ford stated that gender identity theory is liberal ideology and that it shouldn't be forced on parents and children of Ontario. Then on July 16th, 2018, Minister Thompson said that students need to learn about gender identity and appreciation. So, in her answer to her very first question as Education Minister, she contradicted Doug Ford and his multiple campaign promises. This past December, at the Superior Court of Justice, Minister Thompson's Assistant Deputy Minister said that teachers can use any resource they want in the classroom. In other words, teachers could use Wynne's sex ed as a resource. So it hasn't been repealed. In fact, it seems that nothing has been repealed. The Minister of Education has betrayed Doug Ford's February 2018 leadership campaign promise to repeal and replace Wynne's sex ed. She has betrayed Ford's general election platform, and she has betrayed the Ford government's throne speech promise of July 2018. Minister Lisa Thompson needs to resign.
Would you like to comment?
My name is Abdul Janga, and I represent the Thorncliffe Parent Association. My name is Abdul Roj Janga, and I represent Thorncliffe Parent Association. The Thorncliffe is the area where we are sitting right now, and the mission of the Thorncliffe Parent Association, right from its establishment, is to defend the parental rights of thousands of the families in our community, and to protect the innocence and the well-being of our children from the school sex ed curriculum that pushes them towards sexual experimentation and indoctrination. I extend my gratitude for the people who joined us today here at the ground zero of the parents' movement, which I believe ultimately got Kathleen Wynne thrown out of the power. The last provincial election also proved that when politicians stop listening to the people, then there will eventually be no acceptance for them. Kathleen Wynne's sex ed agenda did not just cost her the premiership, it also sank the entire Liberal Party along with her. Last year, in the very same spot where we are standing today, in this very community center, Doug Ford, the candidate, made a promise to the parents of Thorncliffe that if he would win the election and come into the power, he would fully repeal the controversial sex ed curriculum immediately. Repealed sex ed curriculum became one of the popular election campaign slogans, which definitely played a role in Doug Ford's huge victory and in overthrowing the destructive Liberal agenda of Kathleen Wynne. We have been disturbed to see that ever since Premier Ford officially announced that the Liberal sex ed curriculum would be removed, we have seen radical activists pretending to speak for the parents of Ontario, along with the pro-Liberal Teachers Union, trying to pressure the PC government to reinstate the Wynne's controversial sex ed curriculum. But we parents of Ontario and the parents' associations all over the Ontario are determined to not accept any deviation from the promise that Doug Ford made to us. That promise was a full repeal of sex ed curriculum. We want the Premier to know that regardless of whatever pressure he might get from liberals and their vocal allies in the teachers' union, he should not feel alone or helpless. We Ontarians helped him in the past with our votes, and if he remains faithful to the promises he made to us, we will also continue to support him in the noble cause of protecting our children's modesty and well-being in the schools and in the society at large. However, we can no longer support the education minister who tells school boards that they can continue to teach the unscientific theory of gender identity. Just as it was taught in Kathleen Wynne's curriculum, Thompson must resign.
Thank you, Rove. My name is Jack Fonseca from Campaign Life Coalition, and after Premier Ford canceled the Liberal carbon tax, he was able to boast, unlike many politicians, that a promise made was a promise kept. However, Doug Ford cannot say that about his pledge to the Ontario parents, to whom he swore that he would repeal Kathleen Wynne's child abusive sex curriculum. This is a case, unfortunately, of promise made, promise broken. And that is because Education Minister Lisa Thompson made an absolute mockery of Doug Ford's repeal agenda. She has placed the Premier in the embarrassing position of looking like he broke his promise to the people. Ford said he'd repeal it. Thompson is instead repeating it. She's a walking disaster, so Campaign Life Coalition stands in solidarity with our CFA partners in calling for Education Minister Lisa Thompson to resign. Now, I want to take a moment to comment on the tactics briefly that the left is using to try to pressure Doug Ford to renege on his promise to fully repeal the Wynne Sex Ed. The extreme left-wing Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario launched a legal action asking a court to block Ford's repeal as somehow being unconstitutional. Given the sorry state of our courts today, we already know that we're dealing with biased Liberal judges who only pretend to be impartial while they implement every jot and tittle of the Marxist agenda. It's a foregone conclusion in my mind that these judicial activists will support the Radical Teachers Union and eventually declare, with the usual linguistic gymnastics that we've come to expect from bizarre court decisions, that they have, quote, discovered a constitutional right for the teachers union to be able to keep Kathleen Wynne's sex ed curriculum in place. It'll all be hogwash, of course. Provincial governments have the authority to write curriculum, not union bosses or sex activists. And history demonstrates that this is what leftists always do. When they can't win through democracy, like the previous election here, they just go around the voting public to their unelected friends in black robes who always give them what they demand. This has to end. So Campaign Life Coalition is urging, and right now I'm speaking only on behalf of Campaign Life, not necessarily the CFA network. We are urging Premier Ford to publicly declare that his government will invoke the judicial activist override provision contained in Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. When that court, if and when it eventually rules that Ford is not allowed to repeal Kathleen Wynne's sex ed. Ford already used Section 33 to override an activist Liberal judge regarding the size of Toronto City Council. He set a precedent. He must do it again, so as to keep his promise to the parents. He cannot allow any glorified lawyer in a black robe to stand in the way of delivering on this central election promise. And there's a second threat I want to very quickly address to democracy and to the rule of law, which Campaign Life calls on the Premier to meet head on as well. That is the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, which right now is hearing a complaint filed by a bunch of far-left LGBTIQ activists. Now, these far-left activists are seeking to block Ford's sex ed repeal, arguing, quite ridiculously, that repealing Wynne's curriculum is somehow a human rights violation. We urge Premier Ford to implement a past campaign promise by former PC leadership candidate, MPP Randy Hillier, who ran on abolishing the Human Rights Tribunal and the Ontario Human Rights Commission. That would prevent these biased kangaroo courts from abusing their power, because I have no doubt whatsoever that the Human Rights Tribunal will order Premier Ford to reinstate Wynne's early childhood sex program. and we can't allow that to happen. This kangaroo court should be abolished. It is stacked with radical feminists, Marxist ideologues, and far-left LGBTIQ activists. And we know exactly how they'll rule. MPP Hillier had the correct idea in the 2009 leadership race. Now it falls on Premier Ford to seal off this back door that leftists are using to subvert democracy and destroy parental rights. The Human Rights Tribunal ceased long ago being a defender of genuine human rights. It now serves primarily to advance liberal ideology, which in fact replaces real human rights with counterfeit ones. Doug Ford, please abolish it now. Doug Ford, please ensure that Education Minister Lisa Thompson resigns immediately. Thank you. And I guess we open up to questions.
I was wondering if you might comment on some of the politics here. I think this is not the first time that a politician has made a promise to your organizations, maybe during a leadership campaign, that they've turned around and broken. Why do you think that happens, or why is it happening in this case?
So this wasn't a promise, sorry, did you look at this?
No.
Yeah, this is not a promise to organizations, this was a promise to the people. And as far as I can tell, that promise hasn't changed. What has become very clear, and PAVE has alerted this since the maiden speech of the Minister of Education in the legislature, July 16, 2018, when she first basically demonstrated that she had no intention of repealing the curriculum, is that she has no intention of repealing the curriculum. And just to clarify what Jack said, with the Human Rights Commission, that they want to overturn the repeal. There has been no repeal. There has been no repeal. So as to why Lisa Thompson's doing that, I don't know. But she has one job, and that's to execute the mandate of the people given through the voice of the Premier and the caucus. And she has failed to do so, and as such, she must go. Lisa Thompson must resign.
Do you blame Lisa Thompson and not Doug Ford, and if that's accurate, why?
Lisa Thompson has been, through her lawyers and the Assistant Deputy Minister Martin Beckett through cross-examination affidavit through the ETFO court case, it has become very clear that there has been zero repeal. That is her job. She is the Minister of Education. Through a signature, not a legislative procedure, she can repeal this curriculum. She has chosen not to. Again, I don't know why. I don't care. The mandate was to repeal it. There was a declaration in the throne speech from Doug Ford that it would happen, repeal and replace, and now they've gone on with a consultation. Well, I have zero trust and faith that the replace can happen if they can't even handle the repeal effectively.
So you think Premier didn't fully be aware what Education Minister is doing about this sex education curriculum?
I think it's become very clear that Lisa Thompson has not repealed anything. And what parents and what Ontarians have charged this government, and it was the Ford campaign that made this one of, it wasn't like a 5th or 20th campaign promise, this is one of their core campaign promises. They chose to make this a core campaign promise. They won on that mandate. It was a repeal and replace. It was reiterated in the throne speech. Why Lisa Thompson's not, I have no idea. But Doug Ford has been very clear that this has to happen. It has not happened under Lisa Thompson. Therefore, she must go.
Has you request a meeting with the Premier or Education Minister talk about this issue?
We at Campaign Life Coalition, we have requested a meeting with the Premier and through the Premier's office, and to no effect, we've not been granted any meeting. But I'd like to comment on your question to Tanya about why we're calling for why we're blaming the Education Minister. It was clear from Doug Ford made a fairly robust and clear promise to repeal and replace the curriculum by making it a central element of his throne speech. I mean, that's a clear, and then Lisa Thompson almost immediately came out and told reporters that she would not repeal gender identity theory or consent, the teaching of consent. So clearly she was already undermining him, his repeal promise very early on. And the fact of the matter is, a premier gives certain portfolios and delegates the work to those ministries. So the premier, any premier, or even in the case federally of a prime minister, delegates the work to the ministries, and it's up to them to do the work. And so it's her responsibility at this point.
Can
It
you
has
speak,
been.
can you speak to how that promise to parents to repeal the curriculum helped Doug Ford in the leadership race and the PCs in the general election?
Want to take that?
Well, I guess as a former leadership candidate and former party candidate, at least for a few weeks there, until my democratically won nomination was ignored, I did go door to door. I spoke to people, not just in the leadership, but actually door to door in my riding of Mississauga Centre, which is one of the most diverse, culturally and ethnically and religiously diverse ridings in this province, which I was proud to represent. I still, in my heart, I very much love the people of Mississauga Centre. That being said, sorry, I got sidetracked there. Your question was?
How do you feel that the promise to repeal the curriculum helped in both the leadership campaign and the general election?
It was apparent, especially in the leadership. I think remember, before I entered the leadership race, which was February 8th, I can't believe it's been a year, but February 8th, time flies, nobody was really very much talking about sex ed. There was a discussion that, oh, well, maybe we'll look into it. The moment I declared on February 8th, the language of the other three candidates, Mulroney, Elliott, Ford, changed. Actually, sorry, let me rephrase that. Mulroney never changed. She said she'll never look into it. It's case done, case closed. Elliott and Ford bettered their language. They said, oh, well, we need to consult with parents. Consultations weren't done properly. We need to reconsult. Then February 15th at the agenda debate with Steve Paikin, I was very clear, it's not enough to consult. We need to repeal and replace. Fast forward to I believe it was February 28th, the last debate in Ottawa at the Shaw Centre, where Doug Ford publicly bettered his position and said and declared publicly that he would repeal, he supports a full repeal of the Kathleen Wynne sex ed. Christine Elliott again betters her position, saying she would allow for parental opt-out of the curriculum. So how have they responded? They've responded very well. The language changed very clearly. It was clearly there was an evolution. But what happened a year ago tomorrow? A year ago tomorrow, I think Doug already had something that he knew there was something wrong in the curriculum. He said in an interview, a radio interview with Andrew Lawton, that when pressed to say what's specific about the Wynne sex ed is problematic to you, he drilled him down and he said, you know, can you tell me how many genders there are? And that's where that phrase liberal ideology came from. So he referred to gender identity theory and the teaching of it in classrooms to children as liberal ideology. So there obviously was something inside him that, knew that there's something awry with this curriculum. Again, we've heard some language from him. But again, let's just forget Doug. Let's focus back on the failure of his Minister of Education to execute a very simple thing. This is not a legislative matter. It does not need to pass legislation. It's a simple signature saying it's gone. And why this has not been done, I don't know. But it is a betrayal to the parents, and it's a betrayal to Doug Ford's promise. She must resign.
And if I could add a little bit to your question as well, in terms of how we know that the sex ed issue, repealing the sex ed issue, was key in both the leadership contest and in the general election is, for one, Campaign Life Coalition was very active in selling memberships, and we sold or recruited over 9,000 memberships, and sex ed, repealing the sex ed was a driving force. Supporting Tanya's leadership, it was a driving force, and all of those votes rolled up after Tanya eventually dropped off. All of those votes rolled up to Doug Ford practically. So in the leadership, it was a critical factor. If Doug had not adopted Tanya's repeal and replace position, he would not be leader today. It would be Christine Elliott. So that was absolutely critical. In the general election, it's all we heard about. I mean, we have over 100,000 supporters in Canada, in Ontario, and everyone was very excited by the prospect of electing a government that would repeal this child abusive, dangerous sex curriculum from our schools. And so that was a driving force, and we know from speaking to our supporters that they were out there recruiting their church members to go vote. People, Uncle Bob's and Aunt Sally's who never vote, who just say, pox on all their houses on politicians, they're all the same. They went out to vote for Doug Ford. So in my estimation, there was up to 1 million votes that came to the Ford PCs specifically because of the sex ed repeal and replace promise.
A lot of people were disenfranchised from Patrick Brown, right? A lot of people who were concerned about this issue, when Patrick said he would not revisit it, in fact, he encouraged it was the Win Patrick Brown curriculum. They were disaffected, and I don't think those conservatives, small c conservatives, would have come to vote had that not been a central plank or a plank in the Ford campaign. That being said, again, you know, I represent Mississauga Centre, and there are a lot of new Canadians in Ontario, a lot of new Canadians, especially within the GTA. And I think most people choose to come to Canada or leave their home of their birth because there usually is some element of oppression, especially for families, that they cannot pass on their traditions and their cultural practices or their values to their children, and they feel oppressed. And they come to Canada thinking that it's this land of freedom. They come to Ontario specifically because it's the land of opportunity. And opportunity aside, when the government is interfering in a parent's ability to pass on their values or their cultural ideas to their child, that's a problem. And I don't think people come to Canada and come to Ontario to basically be engaged in ideological colonialization in a new country they exist. And I think apart from encouraging children to engage in gender appropriation, I think it's also in fact offensive to encourage basically the overriding of their cultural and traditional norms from the land where they arrive. Yes, we all support freedom. Yes, we understand there are obviously a social compact when we come to Canada and we have to do certain things and keep up our constitution and things like this. That's fine. But you cannot override the right of parents. It's enshrined in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. The parents get to decide, not the government, not teachers' unions, not anyone else. It's the parents. The children don't belong to the government. They belong to the parents. It's their duty.
Can someone say something about the, you know, there's obviously this disappointment that the government has not repealed the curriculum. We haven't been listening to the CFA felt it important to organize a rally to ask parents to come. Can somebody say something maybe about that, maybe comment?
Yeah, say something else and then I'll let you
Okay,
go first.
sure. So I just want to mention that the NDP came up with a petition to keep the sex ed. They got about 1,800 signatures, and they got one of their MPPs to go door to door getting signatures. 1,800 signatures or so. We spent very little time in the dead of summer. We came up with, PAFE, Parents as First Educators, came up with a petition to fully repeal the WIN sex ed, not to teach gender identity theory. We got over 35,000 signatures in a very short period of time. That's an indication of how important this issue is to Ontarians. And another indication of that is that during the PC Party convention, on November 17th, all the delegates were voting for policy. We put forward various policies not to teach gender identity theory, to make sure that the PC Party recognizes that parents are the first primary educators of their children, that opt-out is important and advanced notification is important for parents. And the majority of delegates overwhelmingly voted in support of our policies.
Like 70-80%, not just 50+1. It was like the whole room. We were surprised.
So this is an indication of how important fully repealing the sex ed is to all Ontarians.
Yeah, if I could just say that's definitely the PC Party convention demonstrated without a doubt that where the grassroots base of the party is on repealing this curriculum in its entirety, including the unscientific theory of gender identity.
So if Lisa Thompson chooses to side not with the base of the party, not with the majority of Ontarians, and not with her leader, she must resign. And as Mr. Iacobelli referenced, there is scheduled, I would say weather permitting, but obviously we got here in a terrible storm. There is scheduled to be a rally demanding the resignation of Lisa Thompson on a Wednesday, February 20th. That's next Wednesday at Queen's Park. And it's terrible weather, but we've all been there before in terrible weather. You know, as I infamously remarked to Patrick Brown in a meeting I had with him May 1st, 2016, when he said, oh, we're gonna review all sorts of curriculum. And I said, well, I don't think parents were freezing their butts off on Queen's Park because of the way that children were doing fractions. Just saying. So we will show up and we will freeze, or not, and we don't care, because at the end of the day, these are our children, this is what matters, these are parental rights. I recently, just a small thing, I recently was explaining to my children the historical thing that happened in Ontario, something that happened in history. The Dion quintuplets. Does everybody remember the Dion quintuplets? Remember the government went in and took over the children, and they basically marketed them. The government stepped in. They didn't protect the children, they took over. I think about that. I read a recent book about what happened during Nazi Germany, and how children were basically being indoctrinated in schools. And again, where were the parents? The parents had no rights. Think about the Holodomor crisis in Ukraine. The children were, basically, the right of parents to direct their children's education was just completely cut off. My father came from a communist country. I know those stories. They're terrible stories. We cannot allow the parental rights to be eroded here. We've seen in history how that works. It does not turn out well. Why are we going down this path? Lisa Thompson must resign. I encourage everybody to join us February 20th.
And the timing of that rally at Queen's Park, it starts at 11:30 a.m. until 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon, and that's Wednesday, February 20th. And it is when the legislature is sitting, when MPPs and the Premier are sitting. And so they will be there, they will hear us, they will see us, and we will state very clearly with many, many parents, hopefully, who will brave whatever cold weather there is, to say, Doug Ford, repeal this immediately. And if Lisa Thompson has not resigned by that time, that will also be a very strong message that we'll deliver at Queen's Park.
So what can you tell parents? What's going on in school in terms of this sex education right now as we speak? And like you said, at least 1 million people voted for Ford for this issue. And so can you tell parents what's going on in school right now?
Nothing has changed. Same old, same old. It's the Wynne Thompson sex ed.
So it means, do you have any evidence to see the teachers still teaching the Wynne curriculum entirely?
Sure. Okay, in the government, the Assistant Minister of Education, Deputy Minister Martin Beckett, referred to the following. In the 2018 HPE curriculum, the learning expectation is articulated at a level that continues to provide plenty of opportunity for teachers to teach gender identity concept in their classroom. Lines 14 to 15, page 111. Again, PAVE has been saying this for months, nothing has been repealed. Further on, in the Minister of Education factum, the fact that the words gender identity do not specifically appear in the 2018 learning expectations does not mean that teachers may not teach about this topic. ADM Beckett was clear on cross-examination that yes, quote unquote, students can learn about gender identity. Teachers are furthermore, more from the fact of teachers are free to answer questions or address topics that are not expressly referred to in the curriculum document and the course of teaching curriculum. And just so that we're very clear, like the Thompson 2018 curriculum, that really only applies to the elementary schools of the public school system. The Catholic school system haven't touched the Kathleen Wynne curriculum whatsoever. So the Kathleen Wynne curriculum's components within this Catholic school system are still very much in play. The public high schools, nothing ever was even alleged to have been repealed, so nothing was touched there. This simply is of the elementary school curriculum. And now, as we've made clear, and I can read several other examples, that nothing actually, in fact, has been repealed, and hence why, again, you mentioned the petition. PAVE initiated the legislative petition, over 35,000. We barely lifted a finger to do that, and that's handwritten signatures. It's not electronic, easy peasy. That demanded that gender identity be removed, that the full repeal takes place, and of course that parents be given advance notification opt-out. Because we all know, like, I mean, I'm not against sex ed. I think there's definitely a place for sex ed. I'm very much for science, and I think science is being in the classroom. That being said, I know not every parent is always going to agree with my opinions on what I think sex ed should be taught or not or whatever. So therefore, all parents, no matter what, should always be given as a respect to their rights, advance notification, and an opt-out. It's that simple.
So what's your message to parents? Because if they're still there, everything's the same. What's your message to parents right now?
Be on guard. join us on February 20th.
Come to the
Demand your Minister of Education, she's your voice for the Education Department, that she resign, because she has failed to execute Doug Ford's promise to repeal and replace. She has failed to repeal the curriculum, so demand that she repeal.
Come to
And,
the rally.
you know, stay tuned in the next few days, we'll probably have more actions, but next Wednesday, come to the rally
Yeah.
and talk to your teachers. You know, we are parental rights advocacy group, we hear from parents all the time. I can tell you, I've heard from Catholic public school, or sorry, Catholic parents from elementary school, public elementary school parents. I hear stories in both cases of children, even as young as kindergarten, which is technically outside the purview of the WIN sex ed, being taught all sorts of things, being taught gender identity theory, again, unscientific. It's not rooted in science. Don't believe me? Talk to like Dr. Deborah So, sexual neuroscientist. She writes on this matter all the time. But again, most parents probably don't agree with gender identity theory. Therefore, why is it being taught? In the words of Doug Ford, why is this liberal ideology, he refers it to it. So why is this still being taught? Why has this not been repealed? I'm sick of asking actually why. Just get rid of Lisa Thompson and get a new minister who'll just execute what you said you were gonna do.
And if I can say too that, you know, Doug, as I mentioned in my statement, Doug is very proud of his slogan, promise made, promise kept, and he's said that several times. Carbon tax, abolishing the Drive Clean program, lowering the price of gas, you know, and many other things. The free speech policy being implemented this January at universities and colleges, you know, and he always comes up, promise made, promise kept. So our message is to parents as well as tell Doug Ford that this is a promise he must not break. He must not break this promise. And February 20th at the Parental Rights Rally will be an opportunity to remind him of that and to show him that the parents have not gone away. The parents still demand the total repeal of the controversial sex ed curriculum, including the theory of gender identity. And you know, I was thinking of something in answer to your question about evidence that the sex ed issue was a major factor in the election. Rauf, would you care to speak to what happened in your own riding here, Kathleen Wynn's home riding, what the results were?
Yeah, in fact,
Because I think that's a powerful testament to how much a factor the sex ed issue was repealing it.
yeah, in fact, this riding is used to be Kathleen Wynn's riding, and